The night fell strangely quiet, as if the wind itself was holding its breath, and the monks felt a chill they could not name, because sometimes the world grows dark, not from the sky, but from the human heart. Villagers whispered of unrest, kings sharpened their swords, and even the calm forests around the ancient monastery seemed uneasy, trembling with a secret waiting to be spoken. On this silent night, the Buddha looked toward the horizon, with a gaze that saw not the present, but the suffering yet to come. And Ananda felt a fear he had never known, wondering why his teacher's eyes carried both compassion and warning. If wisdom sees the storm before it forms, then what storm was forming now, and would humanity survive the truth he was about to reveal? Ananda approached the Buddha with hesitant steps, trying to steady his breath as the wind pressed against the old monastery walls, and he whispered that the air felt heavy tonight, as if the world itself was expecting something it wasn't ready to hear. The Buddha listened in silence, his calm presence softening the trembling of the moment, and he told Ananda that every age carries seeds of its own suffering. But only when people forget compassion do those seeds take root. Ananda lowered his head, unsure if the prophecy was near or already unfolding, and wondered whether even the purest hearts could stop a world drifting toward darkness. Rohita stood at the entrance of the courtyard, clutching his broom, watching the elders speak in hushed tones, and fear crept into him because he had never seen the monastery so restless. He wondered if he had done something wrong, or if the world outside their peaceful walls was cracking open in ways he didn't understand. When a sudden gust extinguished a torch beside him, he felt his heart jump, sensing that this night carried a truth too heavy for someone still learning how to be brave. Inside the hall, the monks gathered with quiet footsteps, forming a circle around the Buddha, as if instinct told them that this moment was not like the others. Their eyes searched his face for reassurance, but instead they found a silence deeper than words, a silence that felt like the pause before a storm breaks. When the Buddha finally opened his mouth to speak, the air thickened, and every monk knew that whatever he was about to say would be remembered long after their bodies returned to dust. As the wind roared outside, the Buddha finally spoke of a distant age when people would forget the value of truth, when greed would be praised, and when compassion would be seen as weakness. His words fell softly, yet they struck the hearts of the monks like thunder, stirring fear not for themselves but for the world that would one day walk this dark path. And though the room was warm, a chill crept through the hall as the monks realized that the prophecy was not just a warning, it was a mirror reflecting what humanity could become. At dawn, word arrived from a nearby village that people were fighting over water, a resource once shared freely. And the monks felt a sting of sorrow, knowing how quickly kindness can dry up when fear takes hold. Ananda listened to the messenger and sensed that these conflicts were not isolated. They were spreading like cracks on a pot, ready to break. The Buddha said nothing at first, only gazing at the trembling leaves above them, as if hearing the suffering of countless hearts carried by the wind. As the monks prepared to travel to the troubled village, Rohita watched them with a mix of fear and determination, unsure if he was ready, but knowing the world's suffering would not wait for him to grow comfortable. He remembered the Buddha's words about compassion being the only light strong enough to guide people through dark times. And though his hands still shook, he stepped forward, choosing to follow that light, even if it frightened him. The path to the village wound through dry fields where crops once flourished, and the silence of the land felt heavier than words. Ananda walked beside the Buddha, feeling the dryness of the soil beneath his feet, and realizing that decline often begins quietly, before people notice they are losing what once sustained them. Every step carried the weight of the prophecy, and every distant echo seemed like a warning that the world was already changing. When they reached the village, the monks found wide eyes and tight jaws. Neighbors no longer spoke to each other except in anger. A fight broke out near the well as two men argued over whose family deserved the last buckets of water, and for a moment it seemed that the entire crowd might erupt. The Buddha stepped forward, offering neither blame nor judgment, only quiet presence, and the chaos softened just enough for silence to slip back in. As the tension eased, the Buddha spoke of how fear turns people against each other faster than any enemy could, and how desire blinds the heart until even brothers seem like rivals. His words were simple, but they pierced through bitterness like cool water, touching dry soil. Some villagers lowered their eyes in shame, others in relief, and for a brief moment, the village felt the quiet memory of harmony it had nearly forgotten. The monks gathered beneath an ancient banyan tree as the Buddha prepared to speak, and even the restless wind seemed to settle, as if the world itself wished to listen. Rohita felt his heart pounding, knowing this was the moment when the prophecy would finally be uncovered. When the Buddha's voice rose, gentle but heavy, he said that the decline of humanity does not begin with war or famine. It begins in the quiet places of the mind where greed grows unnoticed. The monks leaned closer, bracing themselves as if standing at the edge of a dark cliff. The Buddha explained the first sign. When people start valuing wealth more than honesty, the heart begins to rot, even while the world appears bright. Ananda felt a heaviness settle in his chest, imagining a future where truth would be traded like a cheap commodity. Rohita swallowed hard, realizing that even now he sometimes struggled with small desires, unaware of how easily they could grow into shadows. Then came the second sign, when kindness becomes something rare, something people admire but no longer practice. The Buddha spoke of a time when offering help would be seen as a burden, not a joy, and people would turn inward, guarding their comfort like treasure. Rohita felt a stain of sadness, wondering how a world could survive if people forgot how to care. The Buddha continued, revealing the third sign. When anger becomes easier than understanding, he described a future where people would shout before listening, judge before knowing, and hurt before thinking. The monks exchanged uneasy glances, imagining a world where every disagreement turned into a storm, and peace felt like a myth told by old men. Finally, the Buddha spoke of the darkest sign. When people forget wisdom and chase pleasure without restraint, believing desire can fill the emptiness inside. His voice softened as he reminded them that desire is a fire that promises warmth, but burns everything it touches. A long silence followed, and in that stillness the monks realized the prophecy was not distant at all. It was already unfolding, one unguarded heart at a time. News reached the monastery that a nearby kingdom had erupted into chaos after the king raised taxes to fund his own luxuries, and the people, pushed beyond their limits, had stormed the palace gates. Ananda felt his stomach tighten as he listened. The prophecy's shadow was no longer distant. It was touching the world directly. The Buddha closed his eyes briefly, sensing the suffering spreading like fire through dry grass, and he told the monks they must go, not to judge or take sides, but to witness how desire can destroy even the mightiest throne. The road toward the kingdom was lined with refugees' families carrying bundles, children crying, elders leaning on sticks, all fleeing a home that no longer felt safe. Rohita felt the weight of every face he passed, realizing suffering was not an idea from scriptures, but something living, breathing, bleeding. Ananda quietly helped a woman steady her child, and though the gesture was small, it reminded him that even in the darkest times, kindness still mattered. By the time the monks reached the kingdom's capital, smoke curled from rooftops, and the air trembled with the echo of angry voices. Soldiers stood rigid at every corner, their eyes hollow from days without rest. The Buddha paused, sensing the fear gripping both rulers and rebels, and he murmured that when desire rules the heart, suffering rules the world. Rohita felt a chill as he stepped forward, wondering if peace could still be saved here. Inside the palace grounds, the king paced with trembling hands, furious that his people had dared to rise against him. His advisors begged him to negotiate, but pride choked his heart like a tightening rope. When the Buddha entered, the king's anger faltered for a moment, shaken by the calm presence before him. The Buddha spoke gently, warning that desire blinds even the strongest man, turning power into chains, and the king felt a crack in the armor he had built around his heart. Outside the palace, riots intensified as fear and anger collided in the streets. People threw stones. Soldiers raised shields. And for a moment, the world seemed ready to tear itself apart. The Buddha stepped into the open square, his presence cutting through the noise like a single breath in a storm, and the chaos softened as eyes turned toward him. He spoke of how desire breeds fear, and fear breeds violence. And in that brief pause, both sides felt the weight of their own hearts trembling. When the chaos settled and the crowd slowly dispersed, Rohita felt the storm continue inside him. A swirl of fear, doubt, and confusion that made his chest tighten. He wondered how the Buddha could stay calm in a world where everything seemed to be falling apart, and the thought made him feel small and ashamed. As they walked away from the burning streets, Rohita finally asked why his heart felt so weak. The Buddha placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said that every person must face their own shadows before they can help others face theirs. Later, near a quiet stream outside the city, Rohita sat alone, listening to the soft water and trying to steady the trembling inside his chest. He felt foolish for thinking he was strong enough to face the world's suffering, and tears slipped down his cheeks before he could stop them. The Buddha approached slowly, not to lecture but to remind him that even the strongest hearts tremble at first. True strength, he said, is not the absence of fear but the courage to sit with it. Ananda watched from a distance, remembering his own early days when doubts felt heavier than his robe, and he realized that every generation must learn the same lesson. The world's suffering is too vast for one person to carry alone. He walked over and sat beside Rohita, telling him that even he, after years with the Buddha, still struggled with fear. Rohita looked up, surprised, and the shared honesty made the night feel a little less cold. The Buddha invited Rohita to close his eyes and breathe with him, guiding him to feel the weight of his fear without running from it. At first, Rohita's breath shook, but slowly a steady rhythm emerged, and the tightness in his chest loosened like knots untying. The Buddha spoke softly about how anger, greed, and fear all grow from the same root, the mind's refusal to sit with discomfort. As Rohita listened, he felt something inside him begin to settle. By the time night deepened, Rohita opened his eyes with a calm he had never felt before, not the calm of having no fears, but the calm of understanding them. He bowed deeply to the Buddha, grateful not for answers, but for being shown the courage to find them within himself. The Buddha smiled gently, knowing this inner victory mattered far more than any battle outside. And as they stood beneath the soft glow of the stars, Rohita realized that the path to saving the world begins with saving one's own heart. As the monks prepared to return to the monastery, Ananda felt a quiet heaviness inside him, realizing that the prophecy was not simply a warning about the distant future. It was a mirror showing humanity what it was already becoming. He walked beside the Buddha, noticing the way his teacher moved with calm certainty despite the chaos they had just witnessed. When Ananda finally gathered the courage to ask whether the decline of the world was inevitable, the Buddha looked at him with gentle eyes and said that destiny is shaped not by storms, but by the hearts that endure them. Back at the monastery, Rohita joined the other monks in repairing storm-damaged roofs, yet his mind kept drifting to the suffering he had seen. He wondered if wisdom alone could truly stand against a world drifting toward greed and anger. When a tile slipped from his hands, shattering on the ground, he froze because in that moment he realized the truth. The world breaks easily when the mind is not steady, and so he breathed deeply, steadying himself before picking up the next tile. Meanwhile, Ananda joined the Buddha beneath the shade of an old neem tree, and the silence between them felt deeper than any scripture. Ananda confessed he feared the prophecy because he felt powerless to stop it. The Buddha replied that the world declines only when people forget their own light, and that even a single mindful heart can guide many. Hearing this, Ananda felt something settle inside him, like a lantern being lit in a dark room. Later that evening, the monks gathered for meditation, but Rohita struggled to calm the noise inside him, the cries of villagers, the anger of rebels, the trembling fear of the king. These memories pressed against his heart like a storm refusing to pass. But when he opened his eyes and saw the Buddha sitting in perfect stillness, he realized the truth hidden beneath the prophecy. The decline of the world begins with the mind, and so does its healing. Slowly, Rohita closed his eyes again, letting the storm soften. As night deepened, Ananda stood outside the hall, gazing at the stars while the Buddha joined him in quiet companionship. Ananda asked why the prophecy spoke so much of decline but so little of hope. The Buddha answered that hope is not something written in prophecies. It is something people must choose. Again and again, even when the world grows dark. Ananda felt a warmth fill his chest, knowing that while decline may begin with the mind, so does awakening, and that truth was the hidden key to everything. At dawn, the monastery lay wrapped in a gentle silence. The kind that arrives after a long storm has finally passed. Rohita walked through the courtyard feeling lighter, though he could not explain why, and each breath seemed to carry a quiet strength he hadn't known before. When he reached the Buddha, he bowed, and the Buddha smiled with a warmth that made the world feel safe for a moment. The prophecy still hung in the air like a distant storm cloud, yet Rohita sensed that even in a world filled with suffering, peace was still possible if hearts remembered how to listen. As the monks gathered for their morning duties, Ananda noticed that the Buddha's steps were slower than before, his breaths more delicate, yet his presence felt brighter than ever, like a lamp shining strongest just before the oil runs out. Ni einsiwi ashunishu a porkster base inside. Ananda felt a knot of worry form in his chest, sensing a chapter nearing its end. When he approached the Buddha, the old teacher placed a hand on his arm and reminded him that all things rise and fall, but wisdom remains if hearts carry it forward. Later, the monks gathered beneath the great banyan tree, where the prophecy had first been spoken, and the Buddha addressed them one last time. He told them that the decline of humanity was not a certainty, but a path made by choice, each thought, each word, each act shaping the world like drops of rain, carving a stone. The monks listened with stillness in their eyes, knowing these words would echo long after their teacher was gone. Rohita felt tears rise, not from fear, but from gratitude for having witnessed a wisdom deeper than time. When the teaching ended, the Buddha invited the monks to walk with him to a nearby grove, where the trees grew tall, and the air felt cool with the whisper of leaves. As they walked, Rohita realized the prophecy was not meant to scare them, but to awaken them, to show that every dark future begins with a neglected present. Standing beneath the soft shade, the monks felt the world grow quiet, as if nature itself bowed in respect to the moment unfolding. As evening settled, the Buddha spoke his final reminder, that even in times of great decline, one mindful heart can shine bright enough to guide many others. He said the world does not fall all at once. It falls when people forget their inner light, and it rises when even one person chooses compassion over comfort. The monks bowed as a soft breeze moved through the grove, carrying his words like seeds across the fading sky. And in that final moment, they understood. The prophecy was not an ending, but a call to awaken.